This is New Day Weekend. Victor Blackwell and Christy Paul.
Good Saturday morning to you. The partial government shutdown is now entering its second week this morning with no signs of President Trump and Democrats preparing to compromise.
Overnight, the Environmental Protection Agency joined the list of governments that are shutting down due to lack of funds. So now more than 800,000 government employees are currently out of work or reporting to work with no promise of a paycheck. Despite a monopoly on power in Washington, President Trump and the Republican-controlled Congress failed to reach a deal this week, meaning any agreement will likely come in the new year when Democrats take back control of the House. In the meantime, the president escalated the showdown, threatening to close the border with Mexico if Congress does not cave to his demand of $5 billion for that border wall. President Trump repeatedly tried to downplay the impact of the government shutdown, saying federal employees welcome the shutdown, or saying those employees out of work are all Democrats.
CNN's Ryan Nobles looks at how the shutdown is impacting the employees who suddenly find themselves without pay.
With President Trump unable to secure funding for his border wall,
I can tell you it's not going to be open until we have a wall, a fence, whatever they'd like to call it. If you don't have that, then we're just not opening.
The government shutdown will likely continue into the new year, affecting an estimated 25% of the federal workforce. 380,000 employees are furloughed and another 420,000 are still working without pay, including the TSA. The Smithsonian Museums and National Zoo will be closing its doors beginning January 2nd, and even the Panda live stream cameras going dark.
These federal workers want the wall.
The president said on Christmas that federal workers support the shutdown. But the shutdown is causing families we spoke to, many who live paycheck to paycheck, to worry about when they may see their next one. And they're fed up.
I have 2 mortgages to pay, and so I haven't even looked at how my checking account is going to balance out. I don't even have children. For people who have kids in school, extracurricular activities, putting food on the plate for their kids, those are all things that, make it even more disgusting what's happening with the federal government right now.
Laureen Targos is a local steward in a public sector union and a physical scientist with the EPA, which shut down Friday at midnight. She, like other EPA employees, received this email referring employees to the Office of Personnel Management for additional guidance. The OPM Thursday tweeting suggestions for workers to send to creditors, landlords, and banks if they can't make their payment on time, like trading maintenance work, like painting and carpentry, for rent payments.
That's absolutely unrealistic. Federal workers are going to be penalized for not paying their bills on time when we just want to go back to work and do the jobs we were hired to do.
Thursday, the president tweeting without evidence that most federal employees are Democrats, but workers say their politics shouldn't even matter.
We are civil servants. We are hired to do our work. At the EPA, workers are hired to protect human health and the environment. If he wants to imagine that we are Democrats instead of us being human beings and civil servants, that's his problem, and I hope Congress steps up and is able to be the adult in the room.
Ryan Nobles, CNN, New York.
Thanks to Ryan for that report. And I think it's important because as we have this conversation about who's responsible, the money for the wall, and if it's a wall or a fence and all of that, we have to remember this is about people who are not getting paid. And we want to talk about one person right now, Lila Johnson. Her bills are adding up quickly. She's one of the thousands of federal workers who will not be getting a paycheck because of the government shutdown if this continues to go on.
Right. And she works for the Department of Agriculture. She's a janitor. Because she works on a contract basis, unlike full-time federal employees who are furloughed, she likely will not get back pay when the shutdown is over. Now, she's worried about how she's going to provide not just for herself, but for her family.
My last paycheck from my job will be 16 hours coming up this Tuesday, on the 31st. I won't be able to pay my bills, as simple as that. I won't be able to put food on the table for my 2 great-grands.
Now, Republicans are ending their lock on power in Washington, having failed to deliver on President Trump's top campaign promise, which is building this wall at the southern border. Members of Congress have left the Capitol. President Trump stayed at the White House and then berated Democrats for refusing to fund the border wall. CNN's Boris Sanchez with us now from the White House. So, Boris, President Trump, he is not budging from his demands. Nobody else is in Washington. Is the fact that he's staying just for optics?
Potentially, we heard from officials yesterday that he would not be joining Melania as she headed south to Mar-a-Lago for the New Year's Eve holiday. The president apparently deciding to stay in Washington through the holiday as long as the government is shut down. And with the government here at the White House, or rather with the president here at the White House alone, he is digging in, pointing fingers, and making new threats. Yesterday, suggesting that the United States should shut down the entire southern border with Mexico, something that would have enormous ramifications for the American economy, not to mention an already volatile stock market. So it's unclear just how serious the president is about closing down the southern border if he doesn't get his wall. The president also suggested that the United States should return to pre-NAFTA days, that trade agreement that he's constantly railing against. Unclear there if the president meant he should also undo the new NAFTA, the USMCA that he signed in recent months and has bragged quite a bit about. To give you an idea of where things stand right now, yesterday the incoming acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, told reporters here on the North Lawn that talks had simply broken down. There is a belief between Mulvaney, the president, and others that Democrats are not willing to make a deal until Nancy Pelosi is sworn in as House Speaker. Mulvaney, in fact, believes that Pelosi is likely not eager to deal because she doesn't have the votes to become House Speaker. Our reporting indicates that she had the votes long before the government shutdown began. We should point out, though, Mulvaney did confirm that Republicans had gone down from that $5 billion demand for border wall funding in their talks with Democrats. He says that when Republicans presented a deal to the Democrats, they essentially didn't present a counteroffer. They said we're leaving, and talks stalled there. We should point out Pelosi and other Democrats have promised that after January 3rd, the first order of business is to vote on one of three potential measures to reopen the government. None of them contain any funding for the president's border wall, so it's unclear they would get anywhere in the Senate. Still, a lot of ground to make up between these two sides, Victor and Christy.
All right, good to point out. Boris Sanchez, we appreciate the update this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's get some analysis now and bring in CNN political commentator and political anchor for Spectrum News, Errol Lewis. Errol, good morning to you.
Good morning, Victor.
First, let's start here with what we're hearing about the framework of this argument. We're hearing from the incoming acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, from the president, from others, that it's not really Senator Schumer who doesn't want to deal. It's Nancy Pelosi. What do you make of that framework and the effectiveness of it?
Well, look, the politics are certainly different in that the Republicans have a majority in the Senate. They also are dealing with sort of slightly different politics, political concerns. But it doesn't really matter. The reality is they're going to have to make a deal with somebody. So whether it's Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer, the basics don't change. You've got to get something through both houses. You've got to get it through the Senate with 60 votes, meaning you've got to pull over at least 6 or 7 or 8 Democrats to your side. And I don't see any prospect of that happening. So whoever they can get a deal with, they have no interest in dragging this out. So presumably they're going to make that deal soon or not at all.
So let's talk about this threat that the president made, that if he doesn't get the money for his border wall or the wall he wants along the southern border, that he's going to shut down the entire southern border with Mexico. What's the potency of a threat like that? And also, let me get at this in. Mick Mulvaney said that this is the only way that they can get the Democrats' attention. Does a threat like this get attention from the Democrats?
Well, not necessarily, because there are a lot of lawyers who work for the Democrats, and they'd be the first to say what I have to say, which is that, U.S. citizens have a constitutional right to enter the country. So shutting down the border entirely is just not something you can do. People have a right to go back and forth. If their movements can't just be restricted willy-nilly in that way. So that's going to be the first problem. The second is there'd be tremendous economic damage that the country just frankly wouldn't stand for. And I guess thirdly, how do you do it? On what basis? There are, in fact, these treaty obligations which have the force of law, which say that only in a national emergency can the border be sealed off, shut down in that way. And I've seen no such emergency or even the prospect of one. So if the president really wants to try and do this, he'll end up in court, there'll be an injunction, and the entire thing will be thrown out on day 1 or day 2. If they want to go through that process, I suspect they don't really want to, but I guess they probably could if they really wanted to.
Yeah, there has been this talk about a potential larger deal, including DACA recipients and the border wall. I want you to listen to this exchange between Jim Acosta and outgoing GOP Senator Jeff Flake, in which he talks about the potential for a deal like that.
It sounds like you'd like to see some sort of dreamer for border wall or border structure compromise. You've had people advance that here in Washington. You'd like to see that.
Yes, and I think that is a deal that could be done.
So, Errol, I mean, it sounds great, but there was a larger deal with billions more on the table earlier that the president shut down. And the president did this about face and signing this continuing resolution to get the government through February after he was criticized by people on the right, including Ann Coulter, who's called, Dreamers the DACA amnesty, and has said that she'd rather deport Dreamers before MS-13. So what would be the incentive for the president to take this deal now?
Yeah, well, his political incentives have not changed. In fact, what you're pointing to is really the tough politics of the situation. The reality is the president was willing to deal. The reality is anybody who sizes up the situation can see that the Democrats are willing to deal, that you've got to sort of give a little here and you'll get a little there. You want a little bit more wall, you're going to have to give on this question of what to do, for example, with young people who were born in this country, have citizenship rights, but their parents are not legal citizens or residents. So if they don't want to make that deal, fine. You'll end up right where we are right now. The deal has always been obvious, but the politics are tough, Victor, because if you look at the polls, they show a really, really wide gap. One of the widest I've seen in a long time on an issue where Republicans overwhelmingly favor the wall. Democrats and independents overwhelmingly do not favor the wall. Democrats are something like 71% don't want the wall, something like 61% of independents. So if the president wants to play to his base and not be accused of quote-unquote amnesty and be in good favor with the right-wing talking heads on the radio and on Fox News, he's doing exactly what he needs to keep them at least happy. On the other side of the ledger is a humanitarian crisis that's developing, both for the people trying to enter the country and increasingly for federal workers, which is really tragic.
All right, Errol Lewis, we'll continue to talk about the consequences of the shutdown throughout the morning. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, a new government finding on coal power plants could lead to more toxins in your air. The Environmental Protection Agency proposing new rules on regulating hazardous air pollutants. The Environmental Protection Agency as well says the new rules would change the way the EPA determines the benefits of limiting different kinds of emissions. That could make it more difficult for the agency to create new regulations. Essentially, the EPA now says the current formula used by the Obama administration is just too costly to justify. Environmental activists say the dramatic change, first reported, by the way, in the New York Times, could do irreparable harm to public safety.
This morning, a man in his own words, he recalls the moment he was kicked out of a hotel for talking to someone on the phone. An incident his attorney describes as calling his mother while black.
16 minutes past the hour right now, and Portland's mayor is condemning an incident where a black man was kicked out of a hotel lobby for talking on the phone with his mother. Ted Wheeler tweeted, "No one should be treated this way, and I hope this serves as a catalyst for necessary changes that address the systemic nature of discrimination of all forms."
CNN correspondent Paul Verkaman has the latest on what happened and the fallout from this incident.
Christy, Victor, Jermaine Massey says he returned from a concert, went back to his DoubleTree hotel, found a quiet place in the lobby to call a family member concerning an emergency. And then he says the security guard started harassing him.
You really want this PR issue, Earl? Do you?
Portland police will be here in a minute.
Thank you. Call them. I'm waiting.
Okay.
They're coming. Why? Why are they coming?
Escort you off the property.
Because what? And I'm staying here?
Not anymore.
Oh, okay. I'm staying here. I have a hotel. I didn't do anything to you. I'm sitting over here taking a phone call.
And Massey says he had the evidence that he was a guest. He showed them a card key envelope with a date on it and his room number. It didn't work. They still called Portland police. Police escorted Massey up to his room, and he was kicked out. Now, Massey's lawyers say the next step will be a strategy that involves both a political possibility and a litigation possibility. They say their client is overwhelmed. And one thing, he does not want this to happen to anybody else. Interesting in all this, the lawyers also say that Massey has Justice Department experience in both human resources with a specialization in discrimination. And he also works for Amazon right now in human resources. As for the hotel, it issued a statement, essentially an apology, saying it was sorry and it wanted to sit down and talk to Massey about all this. Here at CNN, we also reached out to the 2 employees who were responsible for kicking Massey out, and they have not returned our phone calls. Back to you now, Christy, Victor.
Paul, thank you so much. Don Lemon interviewed Jermaine Massey. This was on CNN tonight. Here's how he described what happened.
I was approached by the security guard that you see in the video, and he asked me, was I a guest at the hotel? And I affirmed and told him yes. Shortly thereafter, he stood there and he said, you know, what room number are you staying in? And I told him I don't know the room number. And then at some point, I showed him my room key, and he continued to harass me and ask me questions on what my room number was. And from there, I told my mom I would call her back, and I started recording the incident.
So you ended up eventually leaving the hotel, right?
Yeah, I left the hotel.
But you said that you could have gone to jail had you responded differently, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
They gave me 2 options. When the police arrived, I asked them what were my opportunities here, and they told me I could either stay and ignore their requests and be arrested, or I could comply and go pack up my room and leave the hotel.
So, Greg, what have you heard from the hotel about this incident?
I've heard corporate public relations and corporate gobbledygook. You know, we've asked them, please explain in writing publicly why this man was approached. Why was he interrogated? Why was he trespassed? Why did you call him in your initial response a security threat? And you know, we've not had a straight answer from them. And I anticipate we're going to get a straight answer when we put some people under oath.
But the employee, the people who you claim harassed him or racially harassed him, they have been put on leave, correct?
Yeah, it doesn't mean much. What we're looking at is policy. Why is a security guard deciding to exclude anybody from a public place in an open hotel in the lobby? Why is he targeting this guy? Why, when he says I'm a guest here, does he even have to answer that question? Why, when he shows a key, is he still being harassed? You know, there's something going on here that has to do with policy.
Again, 2 hotel employees have been placed on leave. Doubletree Portland issued this statement on Twitter. We will take the appropriate measures to ensure this does not happen again. We have a zero-tolerance stance on discrimination of any kind.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So Kevin Spacey is hoping that he will not have to do a perp walk, essentially, when he's arraigned next month on sexual assault charges. His lawyers filed the request yesterday, but Nantucket prosecutors say absolutely not. Spacey's accused of getting the 18-year-old drunk and then groping him at a bar. It was back in 2016. Our Miguel Marquez has more on the investigation and on Spacey's response. And please, I want to forewarn you, and it's early in the morning, but this story does contain sexually explicit language.
You trusted me, even though you knew you shouldn't.
The video titled "Let Me Be Frank" posted to Kevin Spacey's verified Twitter account shortly after indecent assault and battery charges brought by a then 18-year-old accuser whose mother spoke out on his behalf last year.
In July 2016, actor Kevin Spacey has sexually assaulted my son.
Spacey, in his video, doesn't address the charges. He performs the video in a kitchen, Santa Claus apron on, and in Frank Underwood character from the Netflix show House of Cards. that Spacey starred in for 5 seasons until he was fired after several allegations of sexual misconduct surfaced.
You wouldn't believe the worst without evidence, would you? You wouldn't rush to judgments without facts, would you? Did you?
Netflix had no comment about the video, whose timing, tone, and substance were jarring given the charges the actor knew were coming. There was a hearing in the case 4 days before Spacey posted the video.
Conclusions can be so deceiving.
One piece of evidence Spacey's accuser has against the 59-year-old actor, says the complaint, is video of the assault itself. The accuser's girlfriend, when interviewed by the police, says she received a Snapchat video from her boyfriend showing Spacey touching the front of the accuser's pants by his crotch.
Kevin Spacey bought him drink after drink after drink. And when my son was drunk, Spacey made his move.
Her son, the accuser, admitted to police he told Spacey that night he was 23, not his real age of 18, according to the complaint. He says the assault happened late night after his shift as a busboy at Nantucket's Club Car restaurant.
The victim, my son, was a starstruck, straight, 18-year-old young man.
The accuser claims after several drinks, Spacey asked sexual questions, exchanged phone numbers, then tried to get him to his house. Then, in a packed bar, the accuser claims Spacey used his left hand and started rubbing his thigh and eventually sexually assaulting him for about 3 minutes.
Nothing could have prepared my son for how that sexual assault would make him feel as a man. It harmed him, and it cannot be undone.
CNN legal analyst Joey Jackson has a lot to say about this one. So, Joey, thank you so much for getting up early for us. I want to ask you first and foremost, as we said, that his lawyers have filed a request yesterday that he not be arraigned next month. Do you anticipate that he's going to be able to skip that arraignment?
Good morning to you, Christy. I do not. I mean, an arraignment is part of the process. Obviously, for those who are unaware, an arraignment is the initial step wherein you are officially, as the defendant, apprised of the charges you're facing. You're offered an opportunity to enter a plea, which is generally not guilty, and bail conditions are set in terms of your release, whether there will be bail, what the amount will be, what your release conditions will be, whether you'll be confined to a particular jurisdiction. And so the attorneys previously have tried to get the case dismissed by saying there's no probable cause. They had a hearing. They were cross-examining the officer, who was investigating and making the arrest. They did not have success with that. I would suspect that he will be arraigned as any other defendant who's accused in a case would be.
Joey, you just brought up a good point. CNN has obtained audio of that hearing you just spoke of, where Spacey's lawyer is arguing here that the victim didn't fight back. That's part of their strategy. Let's listen to some of it.
Instead of walking away or moving back or grabbing the wrist or slapping the hand, he indicated to you during that 3-minute time period that he was texting and Snapchatting.
That's correct.
Is there a defense here, Joey?
I think there's a very viable defense. Remember, in a courtroom, there's always two narratives, and it's up to a jury to make the determination as to what happened and whether Spacey is guilty or not guilty, and that's where it'll be heading. Remember, from the prosecution's position, they're saying that this was an assault, that this was something that was done without consent. The gravamen of this case lies in the area of consent, and that's what that cross-examination was all about, to try to get the case dismissed. The defense will point this out as men who are flirting at a bar. Look at the context. This is not on set. This is not at a Starbucks. This is not at a cafe. This is in a bar where they're drinking together. They're speaking with each other. The number, apparently Spacey's number is given to this person or vice versa. And the state of mind of Spacey in terms of the text thereafter, he says, hey, I thought I lost you when he left. And then, of course, the defense will say, look, when he had his hands on your thigh, there was an opportunity then for it not to escalate to get into your groin area. Was any lack of consent given at that point? And look, Christy, everyone behaves differently, and neither, myself nor anyone else could purport to say how we would act under a similar circumstance. But a reasonable person might not, for 3 minutes, allow somebody's hands in their pants doing something that they object to, and that's what the defense is really going to be here.
So, lastly, Joey, I have to ask you about this video that we just saw of Kevin Spacey as he took on that persona of Frank Underwood. Do you believe that that's going to come into play here somehow? Does it matter?
I do not think it will be. He has a right to get on to Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook, on TV, whatever he wants to do to say what he has to say. I think what will happen is the evidence will be limited to what occurred that night at the bar. Was it consensual? Was it not consensual? And he has the right to fight back. Spacey does in the court of public opinion. At the end of the day, these will be people who are impaneled who will have to decide. And the final thing I'll say, Chrissy, is I think a lot of this case for the prosecution will depend upon them trying to admit what we call prior bad act evidence. And they're going to have to admit, right, that they're going to have to try to admit into evidence points that Spacey's not a good guy. He's done this before. So rulings that are pre-trial are going to have a lot to do with it, because if the jury hears about other instances, they may be prone to believe, hey, you did it then, you did it now, and you may be guilty. But it's a very defensible case at this point. He stands accused, innocent until proven guilty. Let's see what a jury does if it gets that far.
All righty. Joey Jackson, always appreciate your insight, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy.
Well, there were mass shootings, sex assault allegations. There were several crime and misconduct stories in 2018 that made the top headlines. A look at the top 8 stories of the year.
Hi, I'm Gilda. Top 8 crime and misconduct stories of 2018. Number 8. A decades-old suspected serial murderer finally caught.
Captured. Finally, authorities early today arrested a California man they believe is the notorious Golden State Killer.
Investigators say James Joseph D'Angelo, a former police officer, killed 13 people and raped more than 50 women between the years 1975 and 1986, all across the state of California. Police finally caught up with him in April after they matched DNA evidence through a public genealogy database. D'Angelo, now 73 years old, is in jail awaiting his trial. Number 7. A pregnant mother murdered at the hands of her husband after pleading for his missing family to come back.
If somebody has her, just please bring her back.
33-year-old Christopher Watts pleaded guilty in the killings of his pregnant wife, Shanann, and his 2 young daughters, Bella, 4 years of age, and Celeste, just 3.
The victim's family agreed to a plea bargain, trading the death penalty for multiple life sentences without parole.
You have to live with this vision every day of your life, and I hope you see that every time you close your eyes at night.
Number 6. Pipe bombs caused chaos just weeks before the midterm elections.
The packages have been described as, quote, potential explosive devices.
While anchors Poppy Harlow and Jim Sciutto were discussing pipe bombs
and to have projectiles, I mean, that's a...
that were sent to the homes of Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and others around the country.
We're going to jump in. There's a fire alarm
here. You might have heard it in the background. We're going to find out what the latest is
We'll be right back.
They were evacuated from CNN's New York headquarters after security discovered a pipe bomb in the building. 16 pipe bombs in all, allegedly sent by this man, Cesar Sayoc, a Trump supporter. Sayoc was arrested in South Florida, living in his white van, which was covered with images of Donald Trump and targets on prominent liberals. Sayoc, who has pleaded not guilty, faces up to 48 years in prison. Number 5. Disgraced media mogul Harvey Weinstein, charged. He was considered Hollywood royalty, but in the wake of the Me Too movement, dozens of women came forward accusing Harvey Weinstein of sexual assault.
There's so much power and money and prestige in Hollywood in handcuffs right there.
Weinstein was charged with 6 counts of criminal sexual acts, including 2 counts of rape.
He has vehemently denied any of the allegations.
In October, 1 charge was dropped because of inconsistencies with an accuser's story. 5 charges remain. Number 4. Predator priest back in the spotlight.
We have breaking news in our national lead. An explosive report alleging a cover-up of Catholic priest sex abuses dating back decades.
The report, issued by a grand jury in Pennsylvania, found evidence that more than 300 predator priests have been accused of sexually abusing more than 1,000 child victims. Here's just one example. A priest sexually assaulted a little girl as he was visiting her in the hospital after she had her tonsils out. Days later, Pope Francis responded, saying, "We showed no care for the little ones. We abandoned them." Number 3, more sexual abuse of our youth, this time at the trusted hands of an athletic doctor for some of the nation's greatest gymnasts, Dr. Larry Nassar.
Larry Nassar is a monster. I will never forgive you what you've done to me.
More than 150 victims spoke out at a sentencing hearing after he pleaded guilty to 7 counts of criminal sexual conduct.
You do realize now that we, this group of women you so heartlessly abused over such a long period of time, are now a force, and you are nothing.
His sentence, 40 to 175 years in prison. He will serve that after he completes a 60-year sentence on federal child pornography charges. Number 2, America's dad convicted.
Guilty, guilty, guilty!
After a lifetime creating laughter, Bill Cosby's downfall shocked the nation. The actor and comedian found guilty of 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault after prosecutors successfully argued that Cosby drugged and sexually assaulted Andrea Constand in 2004. Accusers of Bill Cosby, those who say they are victims of Bill Cosby, they were in the courtroom and they let out audible cries at that moment. His previous trial ended in a hung jury in 2017, but his second trial came after the Me Too movement took off. Armed with a new defense team, Cosby this time faced testimony from 5 women.
I can say that although justice was delayed, it was not denied.
Cosby's PR team called the guilty verdict racist. He is appealing the conviction from prison. And the number 1 crime story of 2018, mass shootings. 4 of the deadliest single-day mass shootings in the past 70 years took place in 2018. From a high school in Santa Fe, Texas,
10 people are dead after a gunman opens fire,
to a popular college bar in Thousand Oaks, California,
12 dead in yet another mass shooting.
to a synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania,
11 people were killed and 6 were wounded.
and to a high school in Parkland, Florida.
17 people are now confirmed dead.
The deadliest shooting of the year rests at the hands of a former student. Nicholas Cruz walked into his school on Valentine's Day and killed his classmates. Gun deaths in the U.S. have reached their highest level in 40 years.
Shame on you.
But amid those statistics, a spark has ignited, turning young people into gun control activists. Will the numbers rise? Or will this most recent activism